So, Nicole Gruel, thank you so much for being here. I am going to jump over and do a slightly more formal introduction, and then we can get into it. But it is fabulous to have you here and part of the Auckland IANDS group. So, today we are joined by Dr. Nicole Gruel, who is a multiple near-death experiencer, and we're going to be chatting around how her experiences have changed the course of her life to be more positive with others. Nicole's passion for working with wide awakening people comes from a lifetime of spiritually transformative experiences, including a near-death experience by drowning as a teenager, a near-death-like experience from which point everything changed, and a more recent shared death experience when she birthed her daughter. Nicole will also be speaking about her newly charged program for the awakened soul called Agents of Awesome, and how you can become an agent also. And that group is so fabulous, Nicole. I want to welcome you here. The group is amazing. I'm so excited to hear everything that we're going to learn today. There's stuff in there. Now, we've spent a bit of time together in interviews and online and stuff. There's some things in there that I've never heard. So thank you for your time. I can't wait, and I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Oh, Kirsty, thank you. I always love our chats and conversations.
Same.
And interesting stuff always bubbles up.
Same.
So knows what's going to occur today. And you know, it occurs to me too, you and I have a shared, we have a shared feature in our experiences, our near-death experiences, which we'll get into, but I still hear it very rarely. I've only met a couple of other people where they've had, you know, living folks come visit them within the experience. So who knows, hopefully more people will step forward and say that was part of mine too, which would be
I think they're coming. I think it's not been the normal thing, so people haven't said, yeah, because I thought that mine wasn't valid. Background for people listening, both Nicole and I have had living people in our near-death experience, which is almost unheard of. And yeah, I do think, Nicole, it's going to come more common. Yeah.
Great. So I guess I could just jump right on in then, and if there's any areas you want me to extend on, Kirsty, please do jump on in. So I guess I can once upon a time start at the beginning.
Beautiful.
I came from, you know, a very open family. I would call it a family that was open in consciousness, very widely traveled parents, very open-minded to the world, different cultures, different ways of being. So having slightly unusual experiences was not considered odd or something to be pushed away in any way. It was part of the fabric. So when I was young, I started asking questions. I was very curious about the world and things beyond. And when I was 7 years old, I'd ask my father, what God do I believe? And that was a 7-year-old hungering for some kind of structure and guidance. And my father's answer became kind of the blessing and curse of my life. He said, darling, anything you want to. And so I had to journey with that through my entire life. So that's a theme, I guess, that's been running throughout the background of this whole story. And then what happens successively is answers have come in different ways. So these are the experiences. So the first one was a near-death by drowning experience in New Zealand, actually. So there's a big waterfall that I could never remember the name of, but people go whitewater rafting down it, and it's spectacular country. I mean, it's green, it's lush, it's forested. And we went down this raft and went down the 10-meter drop. And we did it the first time and had just such a thrill. If any of you have been whitewater rafting before, you know just the exhilaration of that.
Once, yeah.
So we decided to go again. And only this time, the second time round on the boat, it tipped over at the bottom of the waterfall. Oops. And so I was certainly thrown out of the boat, and I'm still not sure if the others were or not. But when you're thrown out of a boat into that kind of water and you have that much water coming down, it pushes you down. And so I grew up a swimmer, and I had a natural swimmer's response, which is to throw my arms up and to try and swim. And that was the wrong response to have in that moment, because all of that water just pushed me down really, really deep. So I opened my eyes and I looked around, and it was black. Everything around me was black. So, you know, no light in the water. And it was black to the point of not knowing which way was actually up or down. And I knew that there was no point in trying to swim because I didn't know which direction to go. And I had a moment there of utter sheer panic. This is my last breath. And that was followed straight after by feeling absolutely calm and peaceful. It was like everything just became really still. And in that black water, a horizon of light opened up. And the only likeness I can give to it, people have seen the movie Ghost probably, and in the movie Ghost there's a similar scene where, you know, the lovers reunite through that horizon of light. It was exactly that kind of horizon. It just went on forever. And from that horizon of light, so remember we're in black water right now, walking towards me was my maternal grandmother, who is an amazing Japanese woman, well, she's passed on now, but at the time she was actually still alive. And so she came towards me in the water, and she comes from a line of samurai. We have a very strong maternal line in the family. So she came walking towards me, and next to her was my first pet dog. And I'm an only child, and so, you know, my animals were like my siblings. We were very close. And that dog had passed away at that time. So I had a living entity and a non-living entity coming towards me in the horizon of light. And I was 14 years old. So my thought was, this is a bit unusual. What are you doing here underwater? And then I heard a voice right here, a male voice that was very strong that just said, Nicole, remember to breathe. To this day, I don't know whose voice that was. And with that voice, something kicked in here in my frontal, and the recollection of the briefing that morning came that, you know, we have to curl up like a little ball because we had these life jackets on. So I did that, and sure enough, I just rose through the water, you know, dark water to light water to whitewash. And I surfaced and took a breath, and I popped out near a cave. And so, you know, I joke because it was very lucky I came up where I did, because had it been a few seconds later, I would have had my death experience that day as opposed to my near-death experience. And they plucked me out of the water, and off we went. So being 14 and having come from a very open-minded upbringing, it was what it was. I didn't question the experience. My mind had marked that it was slightly unusual, but because it was so drastic, I was simply glad to be alive. And I just carried on with life. And it wasn't until much, much later that I started to look back on that experience and go, oh, wow, you know, that was something a bit different in time. And I've been able to see how that has impacted me later on. So that was experience one. That's kind of a big marker. And those of you listening who've had, you know, near death and other spiritually transformative experiences will know, you know, they happen, and some of them are like big peak experiences and some of them are like little constellation of stars with bits and pieces here and there. They can, you know, they can come in waves and they can totally vanish. So for me, you know, I'll tell you 3 experiences that have kind of been the big ones, but sprinkled in amongst the big ones have been these constellations of lots of other ones. So the second big one we fast forward to now was at the time I was approaching 30 years old. And as a woman, I'd always had some issues with my cycle. My second cycle had always been incredibly heavy, and it just knocked me out of action for a day. I literally could not get out of the house. I'd have all of the symptoms of when you're about to faint, but I would never faint. So I'd have to draw the blinds and be in a very quiet and warm and dark space because everything was just so strong. And so that was happening this one time. Only it actually triggered a 3-day event where I went in and out of states of normal consciousness and not ordinary consciousness. And I'd had other things that were leading up to that event. I'd closed down a healing center business. I had big outer worldly events that were closing down. So it's like my outer identities aspects of self were shutting down in many ways. And for whatever reason, the wisdom of my body, psyche, spirit thought that this was the right time to go through one of these processes. And perhaps some of you will relate. This is a process that I didn't have any control over. It happened to me. And all I could do was go along for the ride of the experience and be witness to what was taking place. And I knew enough by that point in my journey. I'd spent a lot of time in ashrams, and I was deep into yoga and psychology, and spirituality. So I kind of understood enough to know that something important is happening right now. And I don't quite know what it is, but I just need to be with it. Much to the kind of disappointment of my family, who were very concerned about my feverish state at that time and wanted me to go to hospital. And so for 3 days, I was on a couch, and the experience of my body was that I didn't move much from that couch. I went to the bathroom a couple of times. I barely ate any food, and I was just sweating profusely, and I had a very high fever. But what was happening psycho-spiritually is what I've come to now call a mix of a Kundalini shake-up, a Kundalini cleanup. I wouldn't necessarily call it a Kundalini awakening, but it was certainly a cleanup of the system, and a shamanic journeying. So there was like part of the energy was doing the cleanup on the way up of the system, and part of it was going down deep into the roots. And so the shamanic, component was really clearing out the ancestral tracks and meeting the ancestors down both my mother's side and father's side. And
oh yeah, I've got a cat.
And healing those, meeting and healing some of those traumas that were down, those pathways. And the clearing component coming upwards was also addressing traumas and experiences that I hadn't necessarily addressed up until that point. So they were things like abuse that had happened, and hurts and wounds to the heart, just the stuff, the kind of ugly stuff that happens that children don't often ask for, or we don't ask for in life, and yet these experiences happen, and they lodge themselves somewhere within our being. So this was the point in my life where these things needed to be cleared. So this natural, spontaneous process happened over 3 days, and it started to speed up. And I call it the onion peeling. It was like layers and layers of myself just got peeled faster and faster. And each layer was a layer of identity, until right when it was coming towards the end, it was peeling layers off. Like, I would say, I would say, my name is Nicole. And it's like, whoosh, that layer got ripped away, as in, no, you're not. That's not who you are. Okay, I am girl on couch. That got ripped away. So my mind was desperately grasping onto anything I could to hold me in place, to let me know who I was. And this process was just ripping those layers away. And at the final point of it, it came to a pinprick of light. That was it. There was nothing more, and there was nothing less, just a pinprick of light. No name, no identity, no formal structure. And I just knew in that moment that I am this, and that anything I construct outside of this, such as a name, an identity, they're all patterns and choices in life, like very archetypal patterns. And so it was from that moment that this deep clarity hit, that, I get to be a co-creator in life. I can have fun with this. This is a game. This is a game of creation that I get to participate in, and everything's okay, So my life just became a whole heap lighter from that moment. It allowed me to just lighten up a bit, really, and start being a bit more playful in the world. And it doesn't mean that I've buried my head in the sand, or I don't get, and I care deeply. But it helped me see in some ways what they would call the game, the great game, And then the third experience, moving forward again, was about 3 years ago. And this one I'm kind of calling a shared near-death experience. And that's not really a term that we use in the near-death experience community, but I haven't yet found a term that is quite suitable for this one. So I was pregnant and it was time to pop the little one out. And I'd had a very natural pregnancy and I wanted to do the birth very naturally. And I'd made that very clear, that intention very clear to everyone. And of course, that wasn't the pathway it was going to go down, and I was going to get my lesson. But nonetheless, the waters broke and 90 hours passed and not much was happening. There was a slight escalation, but, you know, baby wasn't coming. And finally, the hospital staff were convincing enough that we had to stay there and not go anywhere and do an intervention, because we were getting into dangerous territory. And of course, you know, as any parent would know, you don't want to be in dangerous territory. So they gave me the stuff that they pump in to move things along with the contractions, and then things went terribly pear-shaped. I reacted very badly to it. And so to calm me down, they gave me some of the happy gas, and that was probably the best move ever. If you've ever had happy gas, boy, is that great stuff.
Pity they don't give it in dentists anymore.
Too bad, because gee, it's wonderful. So they couldn't.
The dentist very happy.
Yes.
Pay your bill, happy, laugh.
That's right. Pleasant experience. So they gave me the happy gas, and something about, I think, the exhaustion of labor and 90 hours not having slept properly, and, you know, the whole pregnancy, and then the happy gas substance, something about that combination triggered a spontaneous event. And I was physically in the birthing room with all the machines going and all the craziness of midwives and doctors and everything else and family. And yet another part of me was at the same horizon of light that I had been at when I had that near-death experience. Only, of course, this time I knew exactly where I was and I knew what it was called. So that was fascinating. It was like a split consciousness. I was fully aware of being in the room, and at the same time, I was fully aware of being in the same horizon of light. And I mustered the words to my family to say, I think I'm having a near-death experience. One of us might not make it, and it's going to be okay. And my poor family, goodness knows what was going through their minds as I said those words. But I knew within myself at that time that it really was going to be okay. And in that clear knowing of that moment, it was actually all really funny. It was like hilariously funny how dramatic this whole ordeal had been, and how it was so not what I had wanted, and yet this was exactly how it was supposed to be. It was perfectly orchestrated, exactly how it was supposed to be. And so that part of my consciousness that knew that and could see that was actually laughing hysterically in that moment, yet though my physical body was having a very different experience. And of course, it's very hard to convey those two pieces of self, you know, in that kind of moment. I wanted to really let everyone know it really was okay, you know, even though it didn't look like that at all. And the other piece that came that was clear to me in that moment was we need to go ahead and do a cesarean, just like that, which was the last thing anyone would have thought that would have come out of my mouth, because I'd spent so long wanting a natural birth. And yet there it was, with no resistance from me in that moment. So as soon as that came out, I turned to the midwife. I let her know that's what we're doing. Didn't even consult with anyone by this stage. I'm just like, this is what we're doing. And off we went. And an hour later at 3:33 p.m., I had my little one in my hands. And there was an amazing, the woman who did, you know, the cut, was also a Kiwi doctor who was there visiting. It was like we were surrounded by angels at that time. She was there doing training. She just happened to be available on that day for that operation. And we also had a home birthing midwife who'd come into the hospital, and she was just so different from all the other midwives. She had her own little bag, and she guided me through, you know, and kind of mantraed me through the experience, right? So it was really quite unusual and beautiful. And that doctor, anyway, later on said to me, Nicole, it's a good thing we got the baby out when we did, because had we left her a little longer, we would have been reviving her on the table. And so, you know, to me, that was a confirmation to me of this shared, you know, we were both at the edge, wherever and whatever that is. But I feel that that's true for, you know, my daughter as well. So, and I'm sure we'll have that conversation one day when she's able to have those kinds of talks as well. And I'll see what emerges from her without me giving any prompting. So those are the kind of big three, I guess. And again, sprinkled amidst that have been so many other pieces that bring clarity on the path, or, you know, like a puzzle, they bring a few more pieces together. We don't have the time and depth to go into all of those, but just to give a bit of context, you know, that it's not just the big ones, that there's a bit of a snowball effect that happens. Yeah. And so, what do you want to jump in right now, Kirsty?
I was just about to say thank you, because that was amazing. I always wonder, people who have multiple experiences. So I think you either have one experience, or if you have more than two, then you seem to start to have quite a few experiences. Do you think that that's a fair statement?
Well, I'm done. I'm not wishing more upon myself, but then it's not up to me to know, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I heard about someone this morning who's had 8. I mean, I thought
I know. I've heard of
8. And I'm like, what?
Because the first time I heard of somebody having 2 near-death experiences blew my mind. I'm like, what are the chances that you'd have 2 of them? And then I heard about someone with 3, then 4, then 5, and yeah, now we're up to 8. And actually, someone just mailed me recently, they've had 10 in one night, because they were in a very serious state, and they kept, you know, going on the table or whatever it happened. Yeah, and I just find the multiple experience stories so fascinating. So yeah, that's what was going through my head right then, was around about these multiple experiences. But then also, I'd love to jump in. I'd love to open up for some Q&A if you're up for that. But I'd love to jump in and just ask you a question around when you're with your daughter, because I haven't heard this part of your story at all. And you're seeing the light on the horizon, as I think you said it. What does that look like?
The horizon of light. That was.
Were you in some kind of darkness and the light was over there, or?
No, I mean, look, when I was in the water, it was definite darkness, because I literally had my eyes open underwater and it was black, and then I saw this horizon of light. In the birthing experience, I know it was the same horizon of light. I don't necessarily recall the shades around it, whether it was dark in any way, but that same horizon of light was definitely there. I didn't see color in either of these. It was, if you could liken it to anything, it's like when you get gold or silver paints and you put them in water and they kind of sparkle. It was that kind of a shimmery, it was very, it was strong but soft at the same time. So it was just completely penetrative. Like the horizon was endless in all directions. It would be like if you were staring out at a desert, right? Flat land, totally flat land. And you had that entire horizon, you know, with light coming towards, but not blinding. I mean, you know, I had no problems looking into it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Oh, thank you. I feel very full after hearing that whole thing. I don't know if you want to continue on with more of your story, or whether people have questions, or.
Well, I guess I'll jump in with some of the Agents of Awesome stuff, because you'd introduced.
Yeah, go for it.
And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. You know, One of the things I think these experiences do, and you don't have to have a near-death experience to start to have more openness in self and in consciousness and relationship, to the world. One of the things that these experiences do is, as they open us up, there's often a sense that's awoken in people of service or mission, wanting to contribute and because we savor, well, I'll speak for myself, but I know this to be true because I get to talk with hundreds of people that say it's similar for them. There's this sense of life is just so precious. Every moment is so precious. And so what am I going to do with this time that I've been gifted? This is a gift, this moment. I want to use it well. I want to spend my time on the planet in a way that is purposeful, meaningful, and engages well with other human beings in the living world. And for some people beyond Earth, So so Agents of Awesome is a group, a collective, a tribe of people who they've had experiences of some sort that have awoken in them this sense of wanting to be part of making the planet a better place, and to very concretely address and to step into action in terms of some of the problems that we see going on around us. So it's not just folks who've had spiritual experiences and want to hang out in the cave forever. Those moments are important when, you need to do your hermit stuff and be there and do that. But there is a sense of active engagement and citizenry, which I love about this community, because these are deeply caring people, who are awake and aware, and want to contribute. So yeah, fun times. And I think it's just such a time on the planet for it, in this strange period that we're in right now where, the global shutdowns are happening. It's a very odd time, and it's prompted people to have deep inquiry in many ways, to reevaluate what is important to me in this moment, what is important as a collective on this planet. And I'm the eternal optimist. I really do hope that we come out of this all a bit better. I do have my moments, I will admit, where I kind of, want to go, oh, really? Are we really here? This all looks very dire. But something in me tells me that we as humans can make something amazing of our time on this planet. We can do so much better. We've barely tapped into the potentials that we have. And we've barely done that collectively as well. We don't know how incredibly powerful we are. And I want to be on the planet to see it happen. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I would encourage all of you to go in and have a look at this Agents of Awesome, because it is amazing. It is awesome. I love the questions that you post, Nicole, and some of the promptings. They really get me thinking about the way that I'm living and the impact of everything. There was something you said quite recently, when you started to talk about the group. You said that we are all given this gift of living, and how we often feel such a feeling of life is precious, and I want to use these moments and just be really thankful and use these moments in the best way that I can. You'd previously said something about how everything was exactly as it needed to be. It was orchestrated. That's a hard word to say, isn't it? Perfectly. And, it gets me wondering, because I often wonder whether we take life way too seriously. And I know experiences in particular come back with this overwhelming feeling of purpose and using those moments so beautifully to make an impact for a long-term gain, and that it's not about us, it's about valuing that time that we have here. So what are your thoughts on the two ends of the scale? One is that life is so precious and we have moments and we should use them perfectly. And then the other end of the scale is that we're taking all of this way too seriously and we need to strip off all these layers that you talked about. How do you connect the two ends? Because I find, especially in my own life, I can go from one side to the other, back to the other, and they seem like polar opposites. Is there any middle ground, or how do we navigate that?
Look, I relate, when I have an experience like that tells me everything is so perfectly orchestrated, everything as disastrous as it seems, I knew that to be true in that moment, of that moment and that experience for me. Now, applying that to the entire world and everybody else's lives and what's happening on the planet is another thing altogether. And I'm not going to presume that that's the case, because there's so much that happens in terms of how we treat each other as human beings, in terms of what's going on in this world, and, you know, some very dark intentions where I struggle as a human to place that in any kind of, you know, container of perfection and as it ought to be. I can't put human suffering into something that, you know, particularly when it involves children, that's how it ought to be or meant to be. I can't do that. So I understand completely about that shift, you know, in those spectrums. The way I reconcile it all is to live in the paradox. And I find this true of people's experiences as well. You know, they can be so incredibly different, and people can come to such different, wildly different conclusions about what ought to happen in the world or how things should be. And they're both valid, because I'm not going to challenge someone's experience and say, well, you're wrong about that, if that's been their lived experience. I trust lived experience through a person. I might not understand it. You know, I might not resonate with it, but I won't disagree with it, because if that person has lived it and knows that in the fiber of their being to be true for them, then I think that's worth listening to and going, okay, isn't that curious, you know? And I see people as like little lights on a disco ball. You know, we all have something different that we're all shining out. We all see it from a different perspective. We reflect it out as a different perspective. And we may or we may not be one. I know it's very popular to say, you know, we are all one and we are all connected. Well, again, that is a truth for many people, and that is not a truth for many others. So I can't have this one blanket statement unless I know something is true for me. So I find I'm very open to the polarities, and also very open to the paradoxes. And my approach with all of that to reconcile it is just stay open to it and go, okay, cool. Now what?
And that's a really great place to be, I think. I think that's quite a safe place. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Thank you, Nicole. I wonder if anybody else in the group has any questions for Nicole or anything that they wish to chat through.
Maybe I'll just ask, Nicole, your second experience when you were on the lounge and everything just came to a point of light. Do you think that was your pure self coming through, just you as an energy force?
The language, if we have to use language for it, the word I use is essence. Essence, that fits.
I don't know any of the words.
Yeah, and you know, and people will talk about higher self, or you know, I personally have an aversion to anything hierarchical. Anyway, so as soon as we talk higher anything, I get a bit but that's me. That's my issue. So for me, the term essence works.
Essence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I see that. Thank you. Yeah.
And I guess I should clarify too that wasn't a near-death experience, but in the literature, it's what they would call a near-death-like experience. Okay. And so, you know, if we want to get a bit technical about this, it's like the ego self kind of dying away. But I also take issue with that, because I think the ego is a very important structure. I'm a bit of a fan of, you know, the personality and the self structure and how we can use it to be wonderful.
Well, if you have sharing groups, Nicole, if you have sharing groups, I'd like to learn some of the words. I don't know, you know, been isolated in Tasmania. I'm kind of in isolation, and it's I write and do things, but it's a kind of isolation thing, and there's nobody to talk to about NDEs, nothing like that. Well, I have spoken. People came just into my life just for a moment, and for something I'd blurt out, totally unprepared, but I'd blurt out, "Oh, maybe we were talking towards something. I don't know." I'd say, "No, individual consciousness survives death. That's all there is to it." And it would turn out that whoever I was speaking to had just lost somebody, and they needed to know that. And I'm like, okay, that's here in Tasmania, as well as other places, but that's only well, it's a fairly recent thing. I've only been doing that kind of thing for about 4 years, on and off. It just comes to me. But when I do get with groups of people, I'm never quite sure what I say, and I'd like to be a more controlled kind of. Control is not the word, but I had my NDE 35 years ago. It's just only one, but I've had OBEs since. And I've been, they call it gifted, since I was a baby, just my whole life. And the NDE was a sort of the icing on the cake, because I had a few doubts. And in all that time, I've had several operations with general anaesthetics, and I have never had medical people say it was 9 minutes, and they have put a red allergy band on me and all that jazz. And I've never had, until a couple of years ago, anybody in the medical field ask me about did anything happen during that 9 minutes. So 2 years ago, and I'd lost interest in my own NDE. So 2 years ago, I go in for a very minor procedure, but I needed a general. I go into the admission nurse. I get past the official one. I go, and she says, "Did anything happen during that 9 minutes?" And I'm like, "What?" "Yes," I gave her a very brief summary. There was a student with her, he wanted to know. I went out, and another nurse came along, because the admission nurse was so interested in my NDE, she forgot to take my blood pressure and things like that. So this other nurse came along, and she looks at the chart and says the same thing. And I'm nearly falling over with shock by then. Then the anaesthetist comes. This is Tasmania, and nobody's interested in anything spiritual down here. It's a very, very earthbound state to live in. And I have the anaesthetist say, "Okay, tell me, did anything happen during that 9 minutes?" And I'm like, "What?" And I told him a longer version. He wanted to know more and more. And the surgeon had to come looking for us. He was 3/4 of an hour late for the surgery. And it put him back the whole day. And that surgeon, when I went to see him in his office, he asked the same thing. And then my GP asked the same thing, and she's going to schedule a special appointment so we can just talk about it. But I'm walking around in shock because it's been never had medical people, and the anaesthetist said he's been asking people for about a year, and the stories just so similar, obviously, and it's just amazing that people are taking an interest. And he said that there are doctors, anaesthetists, and surgeons on the mainland taking an interest too. So something's happening, and I'm not sure what, and I'm not even sure what to do with my NDE, other than how it affects me personally. I'm not a preacher. I don't go out there and preach it, and I'm not like you. I've done things, but not to. The NDE has pushed me to do certain things, to form groups for people with clinical depression and get medication petitions to get them on the PBS and all sorts of things. I'm seen as a ghastly activist down here. And, you know, it's pushed me to do a lot of things I probably wouldn't have done. But when I had it, I was with a very non-spirit, my husband, and very non-spiritual group. You didn't mention it at all, and I just pushed it aside. So I'm really fascinated by the newness of that's made up a new word, the newness of what I'm experiencing. And I'm not really sure what's happening. I continue on, but I think about it. Oh, what am I supposed to do with it? Okay, I need to talk to people about this, and I've just discovered I don't even know the words to express.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and for sharing. You know, we haven't gone into the content of your experience, but
No, I don't want to. It's too long.
And you know, I would say about the language to not get too caught up in it. There is language out there, but at the end of the day, what I find is important about these experiences, NDE and otherwise, is that as you've experienced, there's something about them that it connects us to a fundamental piece of who we are. And I think the task that a lot of experiences have is to reconcile that and to try and, as best they can, align what they feel on the inside, who they feel themselves to be, with the reality of the outer world around them. So in terms of their relationships, you know, groups that they might form, affiliations, the work that they do, the food that we put into our body, you know, when we're shifted or we're connected to our core, to that essence, you know, when we're put in touch with that piece of ourselves, then life becomes so hard if we can't honor that, because we've tasted it and we know what that is. And the more we kind of resist that and push it away, the more that, you know, the problems can show up in many ways. And it's not to say that if you fully align with your path and you honor it, that life is problem free. I don't think it's ever problem free.
That would be nice.
Wouldn't it? You know, but I think it certainly becomes more relaxed and more joyful in, you know, you can walk the world feeling connected with yourself, connected with something beyond self, and connected with others in just a really easy kind of way. And it means that when shit hits the fan and when stuff comes up, that there is more of us that we can bring in presence to that moment and just be with it and not get hung up on all the baggage around it or the drama around it, but just be with it and move through it. So I think you've done, from what you shared there, a magnificent job of listening to, you know, parts of the experience and honoring it in terms of constructing the groups that you have, moving towards the areas of interest that you do. You know, I can hear it speaking through your experience there, which I think is marvelous. And connecting with community who understand. So, you know, here we are with Auckland.
Well, this is what the only connection.
It's marvelous. So we have the Auckland group, we have the Sydney group for the Down Under folks, but of course IANDS itself has been doing incredible work in helping the world know what on earth this thing is called a near-death experience, and particularly they're strong on the education piece. So they're doing a lot of work in educating the medical field right now. They have doctors taking courses, medical students taking courses, and IANDS representatives going and doing lectures to medical students right now. I mean, given they are integrative, holistic health medical students, not necessarily the mainstream, but the point is they're out there talking. You have Dr. Oz, and you have doctors on Dr. Oz talking about their experiences. You have folks talking about end of life research as well, where they're watching life transition, and you hear about the hospice workers and the nurses, and they're sharing all of this. I saw light in the room, and this happened and that happened. So it's not abnormal to be talking about these things in this day and age as much as it was even 5, 10, definitely 20, 30 years ago.
No, not 30 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to actually echo everything you've said there, Nicole, because I totally agree with what you're saying. And yeah, the work that IANDS is doing is just amazing. It has set the stage and made everything a lot more mainstream than it ever was. 35 years is quite a long time, Karen. I had my near-death experience over 30 years ago now, but it took me 27 years to talk about it. But what I'm seeing is, just like Nicole said, there is an education out there to these types of experiences. It's not a hush-hush topic anymore. It's not something that the first option is to medicate when people talk about these types of experiences. And that's what happened many years ago. Yeah, we need to medicate this person because they're obviously not of a sound mind. And yeah, I hope that this has been really encouraging to you, because there are amazing resources out there. There are supportive communities. We have many options and resources available. So I hope that that's been encouraging, but I wanted to just really reinforce what Nicole has been saying of all of this stuff that is taking place and how things are changing. The conversation is changing, and people are a lot more open to this type of experience, or these types of experiences, because there's more than one type, and just the way that it's the transition that we're going into.
How do you find, if you don't mind me asking, how do you find New Zealand? Because I'm wondering if a lot of the doctor education is actually only in America or the Northern
No, I definitely think it's global. We can probably chat a lot more about that offline. New Zealand is definitely warming up. The fact that we have an IANDS group here now in New Zealand makes me very excited. There are quite a few experiences coming out of the woodwork here in New Zealand, whereas a year ago I didn't know very many people. I think I only knew one other experiencer in New Zealand, but now there are many. And it's because this conversation's taking shape, because people are coming up, they're opening up. Some amazing things are happening. And I think we look at the world, 2020 has been the most crazy year yet. It is just so unique and unusual, but that opens up opportunity, that opens up conversation, that opens up people are looking for things, they're searching for answers. And I think the spiritual climate globally is just really changing. It's taking place. So yeah, we can talk about that a little bit more. I'd love to go deeper with you, Karen. But I really just want to encourage you that there is a place for this conversation, and that you don't need to feel isolated, don't need to feel alone. We will help you with that, to understand where you can go.
Would be very much appreciated.
Yeah.
NDE is so long ago, yet it's there. It's like it happened just a few minutes ago.
Exactly. And that's what experiencers say globally. That's what many people are saying, is it's like it's the strongest memory they ever had. Happened like it was just a few minutes ago, or happened yesterday, and yet it was many years ago. I'm so happy these conversations are getting out there. Nicole, I don't know Nicole, I don't know whether you have any final things that you want to say.
I think Michelle had unmuted herself, so.
Oh, sorry, Michelle, jump on in there.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to ask a question, Nicole. I'm not sure exactly what the question is. but it's just around psychology and near-death experiences. And Kirsty, you were just saying about how it's more of a safe environment now for people to discuss these sorts of experiences openly, with discretion, obviously.
Yeah.
But there are safe places now that we can discuss these sorts of things and not feel like we're going to be medicated. And Nicole, I just wanted to hear your take on that, because you obviously are involved in this work with a large number of people, and just sort of what you're seeing, you know, in terms of the psychology and the near-death experiences.
Yeah. I'll broaden it to talk about people having spiritually transformative experiences. There are still stories I hear almost every day about people who have received a medical diagnosis of some sort, a psychiatric diagnosis, and have been medicated. So, you know, there is a criteria that psychiatry uses the DSM-4. It's like their little manual, their Bible, right? And there is a section that was in number 4, and I think they're up to number 5 now. But there was a section put in there called spiritual problems. And it was a lot of hard work for these people in the field at the time to actually get that put into mainstream medicine. That there is actually, you know, this spiritual component to psychology that you don't need to medicate for, you don't need to diagnose for, but it was still pathologized. It was still labeled a problem. So there are many people who have experiences where, you know, they end up in the psychiatric ward, because often, particularly in the initial stage, and if someone's going through more of a crisis like experiences as opposed to like a smoother, you know, awakening, if it's a very acute crisis and someone goes in and they say, look, I'm hearing voices, I'm having visions, that's going to, you know, ring some alarm bells for someone who is trained to identify those as markers of something that is wrong with you, right? And the problem, what I'm hearing from many people who have gone through the medical path is, you know, for some that has been the right thing at the right time, particularly if there's harm to self or harm to others involved. And for many others, it has for them felt like it's halted a process that was already taking place or needs to take place. And so for many people, I find it can confuse and complicate a psychosomatic process that's taking place. I think we as humans are naturally built to have these moments of growth and evolution psychosomatically. I think that's part of who we are. For whatever reason, we completely accept it with young kids that they go through these growing stages and they make these leaps and these bounds. And I guess maybe because we can see it so clearly with children that it's natural that they do it. But as we get into adulthood, I don't know why we think that's meant to stop. You know, like for me personally, of course we keep evolving and growing and shifting and changing. But as an adult, everything just becomes much more complex. So my feeling is these experiences are a natural, normal part of being human. We're meant to have them. They're a good thing. And we are in a modern society, particularly in the West, that doesn't quite understand and appreciate and certainly doesn't celebrate what these experiences are and the potential they can have. Ancient societies, many of them did. You know, earth-based societies, the shamans had a place, the medical people had a place. When someone went through these transformative crises or experiences, they could have members of the society that would say, that's a gift. Let me mentor you and show you how to actually use that. Those structures barely exist these days, or certainly not in any kind of, you know, formal way in society. They're very loose. So psychology and psychiatry have a really interesting place there. You know, they're there to try and help people's minds, hearts be better off. But they're so, you know, because they approach it with a pathological lens, there's always this idea that something has to be wrong. Something's broken in the brain. There's a problem to be fixed. And I think if we can come from it. This is why I entered transpersonal psychology, you know, because that was a whole wave that wanted to look at human potential and growth in a different way, not pathological, but what if something else were taking place here? What if there was nothing wrong with us, but there was something interesting taking place? And what is that about? So, you know, psychology, psychiatry, and of course the root of those words is soul, right? And in many ways, modern psychiatry and psychology have lost the soul. They've lost the spirit of the practice. It's not to say those practitioners don't have spirit. I know many practitioners who are deeply spiritual, but they're stuck in a system that is stifling in many ways, and they know it doesn't honor the spiritual experiencer. So your question, Michelle, you know, it's very complicated, that whole area where psychology meets spirituality, meets pathology, meets celebration. Well, we have a psychotherapist on the line, so fantastic. I don't know if we can get voice from Jane, who's here, but it would be wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
So has that kind of answered or clarified a bit, Michelle, where we were going?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
I'd love to just read out Jane's message for those of you who are watching the replay, or if you're not quite sure, we don't seem to have any audio for Jane, but she says, I'm a psychotherapist here in New Zealand, and I have a page on my website letting people know that I'm providing a place for NDE and STE experiences to discuss their experiences. Psychotherapy equals listening to the soul. So that is just fabulous. Do you want to pop in, Jane? Do you want to just pop your website address into there? But amazing work, just bringing all of it back together. And this is just another example of how this field is opening up, isn't it? That people are getting more and more used to having this out there in the mainstream, and just how the conversation is taking place, but perhaps we don't see it all around us. Okay, so the website for that is www.lifechanges.co.nz.
And
Jane,
I love
wow.
that these conversations can come out, because, you know, most professionals who are in the field of medicine, whether it be psychology, psychotherapy, you know, modern MD kind of medicine, I really think the vast majority of people, their hearts are in the right place. They want to help. They entered the field because they want to do good things. And yet, you know, when you enter a particular field or education system, you're also limited by the constructs of that system and what it's called, how it's structured, and the trappings of it, particularly around, you know, things like insurance and etc. You have to toe a particular line. And what's really warming my heart to see, you know, is folks like Jane, who are bringing the soul back into a field that initially was about the soul, the study of the soul, the listening to the soul. I think this is how we redeem. We can't do away with these systems. I don't think the solution is get rid of the systems. I think it's fix them, heal them, improve them. And the way that we do that from within the matrix is to have experiencers and folks who have been through it sharing their stories, working within the systems themselves to actually come from the right place of, you know, from experiencer for experiencer. Yeah. And it's happening in many ways. Yeah.
May I have that website again? I only got www.lifechanges.
Yep, let me just bring that up again. Lifechanges.co.nz. So you can go on to find some more information there.
Thanks very much. Sorry I was slow on getting it.
That's okay. We will put the link into both of the IANDS groups. We've got the Sydney IANDS group and the Auckland one here. We'll put that link in there. So thank you, Jane, for sharing that. Yes, again, we do have to wrap it just based on time. I want to just repeat myself here. The Agents of Awesome is another fabulous place to go. Now, this is run through Facebook, isn't it, Nicole?
It sure is. So sorry if you're not on Facebook. There will be, I've had people who were like, I'm not on Facebook, how do I be part? We hope to do face-to-faces once again when all of that is up and running again. But for now, if you're on Facey, come visit us. It's a Facebook group, Agents of Awesome Tribe, I think it is. Anyway, we'll have the links for you there, and it
Yeah,
would be
we will.
a pleasure to welcome.
We'll definitely.
everyone listening to this.
But this is amazing. This is blowing my mind.
Oh, that's good. I also just want to throw in there, we've also got the Let's Talk Near Death online community. So that is where it's a collaboration of interviews, of research, of discussion. There are different levels for that. So if you want to find more about that, that is at www.
Please send me a link. I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, will do.
Really zoned out with
www.letstalkneardeath.com. Yep, so your mind is blowing.
Yeah, my mind's just going, 35 years, what's happening?
I know, but we're hearing this all the time, Karen. You are not alone in that, because the conversation is just taking off because of the time that we're in, because of the situation of the world, the way that the medical field is progressing, from the amazing work that has been done out there, people like Jane, like Nicole, amazing stuff that is changing the climate. And so you're not alone in wondering where this conversation has been, and suddenly here it is. And it's just so exciting to see the conversation coming to light. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, wow.
I think the IANDS online. I think the IANDS online conference is like just around the corner as well.
Yeah,
so
we will.
It's something you can totally binge watch on and hear so many people's stories and experiences, as well as professionals in the field who have done research around these issues, and they have a backlog of so many different areas of discussion related to near-death experiences. So you are so not alone, Karen, and welcome.
You are not. Yeah. So we'll put the link to that as well for you. Yeah, when you buy your ticket for that, which is extremely reasonable. Sorry?
How much is that?
I think Kirsty can pop up the link.
Yeah, I'll pop up all the information. It's extremely reasonable. You get 90 days of listening after the conference. You don't need to attend live. IANDS, this is why both Nicole and I are part of this organization, is because it is doing fabulous work globally as well. So it's really, really exciting.
And we really want to strengthen the voice down under for experiences, because so much happens over there in North America. So we have the vision of it was going to happen this year, but obviously it can't now. But we have the vision of bringing people together physically, and alternating between Australia and New Zealand to have gatherings and just be with one another, because we get it. And when we all get together, there's a lot you don't even need to say, because people just understand you on that level.
Exactly. It will happen, just not in 2020.
That's right.
So Nicole Gruel, Dr. Nicole Gruel, I want to say a huge thank you. This has been amazing, and look at the conversation it sparked. I have to say I'm quite excited by that. Thank you for coming on and sharing all of your experiences. Again, just being the amazing bubbly soul that you are. And, I love having you here. I love the conversation that it opens. So Nicole, thank you so much.